combining research on both the West Bengal side of the Sundarbans forest with the Bangladesh side. So that's why we've called the session Sundarbans Without Boundaries. And it's really exciting to have this prospect of actually linking the two together. So I'm not going to say any more, but hand over to Lyla, who's going to kick off. We will then have a presentation on the Sundarbans research itself, and then presentation on the photo stories and the visual research on visual material. And then we have the benefit of three very distinguished commentators who are coming in to comment on the presentations. So we would have Annu Jalais from the University of Singapore, National University of Singapore, Amites Mukhopadyay from Jadavpur University in Kolkata, and Nadiruzzaman from currently at Hamburg University, but did used to be associated with ICCCAD. And sorry if you don't know me, I'm Terry Cannon from the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex, and I'll be hosting you as chairperson this afternoon, at this time, because I know it's late for many of you in other parts of Asia. So welcome, and I'm going to hand over to Lyla, and we hope that Annu's tiger does not escape. I expect many of you can see that she has a tiger in her photo. So I don't. Often we have an elephant in the room. This is the first time I've ever seen a tiger in the room. But I'll hand over to you now, Lyla. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I want to first thank Gobeshona, the conference, and all the organizers for the amazing work. This is a terrific effort, really innovative conference, and the Tapestry project is really happy to be part of it. I'm the project leader of this project. I'm a professor at IDS and also a visiting professor in Norway. And our project spans across 5 countries: Bangladesh, India, Japan, Norway, and the UK. It is part of the Transformations to Sustainability program, which has multiple funders, very complicated governance structure: Belmont, Norface, ISE, and several research councils, including JSD, Research Council of Norway, ESRC, etc. So the project Tapestry focuses on how transformations to sustainability may arise from below in marginal environments in India and Bangladesh, characterized by climate change uncertainties. And since time immemorial, these regions have been brushed off as marginal, as unproductive, and we're trying to flip that lens, and we're looking at climate change uncertainties as a way to do that. Now, as we know from this conference and beyond, that climate change, the impacts are deeply uncertain, especially at the local level. And these impacts and uncertainties manifest themselves in very variable ecosystems and in interactions with other drivers of change. So capitalist trajectories, policy processes, etc. And we're looking in wetlands in India, Bangladesh, as well as drylands and coastal areas where uncertainties associated with floods, cyclones, droughts interact with these uneven impacts of capitalist expansion policies. And all these threaten poor and marginal and vulnerable people's sense of well-being and their sense of place and identity. And also interventions around climate change adaptation can also exacerbate these vulnerabilities, as we saw in the previous session, be it in Mumbai or in Kutch. Now, uncertainty has multiple domains, and we see it as epistemic, ontological, and also linked to broader political economy considerations. And it can be framed in different ways by different actors and also politicized in multiple ways. But our starting point is that while uncertainty can cause anxiety and about the future, or is sort of controlled in a managerialist way by policy actors, we investigate whether it can be an opportunity for transformation. So our focus is on bottom-up transformations. Now we're looking at different patches of transformation. So Sundarbans is one patch, and the other two, which were in the previous session, are Kutch in Western India and Bombay. And we're looking at alliances or transformative alliances between hybrid actors, local communities, NGOs, scientists, can create socially just as well as ecologically sound alternatives based on multiple understandings, especially building on local people's own understandings and experiences of what transformation entails. And what's key in our project is transdisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity in co-production. So we are working across the disciplines, but we're also working across actors. So we're working with communities, with academics, non-academics, to create this kind of praxis of transformation, whereby praxis presupposes change in social arrangements or their reconstruction through the agency of individuals. Now, one patch is Sundarbans, and it's across India and Bangladesh, and this delta. And we're looking at collaborative efforts between CSOs, local communities, and scientists around livelihoods and enhancing local biodiversity. Now, as all of you know, this delta is home to the largest mangrove forest in the area. It's recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. It's also a climate hotspot, but the attention on the Indian side has been on biodiversity and the tiger, often neglecting the rights of local people. And because attention has been on cyclones, storm surges, land erosion, sea level rise, disappearing islands, etc. There's a whole issue around attribution here. How much of it is because of climate change? How much of it is because this is a major delta with so many Himalayan rivers coming in here? How much of it is because of port development? How much of it is because of an active geology? And even earlier, last year, we had Cyclone Amphan. Earlier, we had Lyla. So all these have caused a lot of devastation, especially to agricultural livelihoods. And on top of that, we have the pandemic. In both sides, we're seeing very unequal growth and trajectory. So you have tourism, you have shrimp farming, conservation, and all these are negatively impacting on local people and their rights. And also a huge out-migration and female-headed households. But, there's a lot of commonality across. And what we find is that so Tapestry is trying to challenge state-dominated development trajectories that has tended to neglect the dynamic nature of the Delta, as well as its multifaceted development challenges. And we've seen that often there's been a huge focus on top-down solutions, for example, concrete embankments, and these could prove maladaptive in the long run. So we are looking and seeking out locally appropriate sustainable solutions that can expand livelihood options. Now, why are we interested in the transboundary? And I'm really, really excited about this session. And maybe thanks to the pandemic, we are actually forced to do these online webinars, which means we can actually break down these barriers and bring a lot of people together. So obviously the ecology, rivers, watersheds, catchments know no boundaries. And we have a very artificial boundary here, thanks to history and colonialism. There are huge cultural similarities. And these islands have, often I've heard policymakers say, people haven't been there very long, only 300 years, but so what, there's huge place attachment. And the islanders have created their sense of place, their syncretic culture. Different groups of Muslims, Hindus, Adivasis have created the syncretism, where, for example, the goddess Bon Bibi is venerated as their protector. A few days ago, Bangladesh celebrated the Bon Bibi festival on the 15th of January. And I believe the same festival takes place in May, and all over the Delta, Bon Bibi is worshipped and is seen as the savior, the protector, etc. And of course, Annu and others, Amites and others have done lots and lots of work on this, really exciting ethnographic work. And largely and sadly, we see the politicization in the Delta and also the targeting of minorities. Disaster and cyclones don't know boundaries. Amphan devastated both. And while the number of deaths were kept under control, so they say, because of disaster management, we have this recurring problem of the submergence of agricultural land, devastation, etc. And finally, there's a lot to learn and compare in terms of the role of state, of planning, as well as donors. Who act maybe in different ways in both places. Bangladesh has done excellent work in terms of climate adaptation, often building on the role of NGOs. India, as we saw in the last session, has probably been more top-down. There's been greater focus on mitigation and not enough on adaptation. And in both, you have the marginalization of locals. So how can we break this? How can we be more transformative? How can we learn from the bottom up? This is really the start of a dialogue on the transboundary, and really excited about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lyla. Good introduction to the attempts to link the two sides of the region. I'm going to call upon our next speakers now, who are doing a joint presentation. Shababa Haque, who's been at ICCCAD for some years, but now to congratulate her is moving to the University of Durham in Britain to take up a PhD opportunity working on deltas, research on deltas. And the second presenter is Upasona Ghosh, who is from the Indian Institute of Public Health, currently based in Bhubaneshwar. And they're going to talk about the actual research that has been achieved and of course disrupted by COVID in the two sides of the Sundarbans region. So I'd like to hand over to you first, Shababa.
Hi, Terry. Thank you so much for the introduction. I would like to start sharing the screen, and please do say if everyone can see it properly. If not, we have a bit of trouble on our hands. Can everyone see the screen?
Yeah.
Great. Upasona, my colleague Upasona will start the presentation, and then I'll talk about the Bangladesh aspect, and then the Indian and how Sundarbans is more than just Bangladesh, India, and it is beyond borders. So I'd like to introduce my colleague Upasona to take over. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Terry and Shababa, and thank you, Lyla. Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Upasona Ghosh. So I have working in the Indian part of Sundarbans for close to a decade now. So we always see Sundarbans like whether it is an Indian part or a Bangladesh part, but there are very few work or very few initiative that's look this region as an unified piece of land or a delta that is as Lyla mentioned, that is shared between two countries by the colonial rulers and the political boundaries. So why we are interested in this trans-boundary aspect of Sundarbans, definitely there are cultural similarities, there are lots of ecological uncertainties, which is very similar to in both the countries. But somehow we are more interested to know that's what learning we can learn from these two countries so that we can think of transformative initiatives in terms of climate change are concerned in these two countries in this unified region of Sundarbans. So Sundarbans, the beautiful forest, it's the largest mangrove delta, it has rich biodiversity, the fragile ecologies, human nature conflicts, it's a part of the daily existence of the inhabitants of the Sundarbans. It has the cult of Bone Bibi as a symbol of cultural syncretism. It's a very colonial hangover is still there in terms of the socio-political marginalizations. Now this entire complex system is having the climate change impacts in last 30 to 40 years. So it's somehow both in India and Bangladesh, it is very close to globalization, yet very far from the so-called modernized development. There are vested political economic interest in terms of policy making, in terms of top-down developmental searchlights, and the communities there are very vulnerable. At the same time, they're somehow resilient. They have that aspiration to break the boundaries and do something for themselves, the sense of belonging to the people of Sundarbans. So there are another issue, which is the two countries, the transboundary things are happening is a mobile communities, means the in-migration in both the countries, or even a daily mobility in kind of if as the peoples are concerned. So next slide, please. So now all this unique and complex system is facing the ecological uncertainties in terms of climate change. It has a sea level rise, it has increasing sea surface temperature. Every year, almost every year, there are cyclones and severe to moderate cyclones. There are the decrease of upstream freshwater flow. At the same time, rainfalls became very erratic and intense, which is have a direct impact on the crop yields. And its entire weather pattern has been changed, which is impacting the fish habitat and the relative fish catch by the communities. Next slide, please. So next slide, please. Yeah. So this impacts of climate change, the manifestations of climate change in terms of land erosions, we can find many vanishing islands in especially in the Indian parts, embankment breaching, frequent inundations, and salinity ingredients in the land and the freshwater sources. So people are basically try to cope from this, try to coping these changes in terms of migration. So we will talk about later both in the Indian and Bangladesh perspectives. Next slide, please. So to understand this complex scenario, we have come up with the research questions like how the climate change and related uncertainties are affecting the well-being and identity of the people living in both India and Bangladesh. What are the emerging initiatives, alliances, practices between the various actors who are trying to deal with the climate change impacts in the Sundarbans, and what terms of co-productions may give a transformative elements to this piece in into an as a unified region, so not divided by the political boundaries. Next slide, please. Now Shababa will talk about the Bangladesh part of Sundarbans, focusing on the Bangladesh part, and I will come up later after her with the Indian parts. Shababa, over to you.
Thank you so much, Upasana. Okay. So the Bangladesh Sundarbans is located in the southwest of the country. And because of the location of the Bangladesh Sundarbans and the geography and the socioeconomic status of the country, and specifically that area, the area is vulnerable to a variety of hazards and climatic shocks, making it one of the poorest areas in the country. My colleague Upasana mentioned some of the ecological uncertainties. In addition to those, riverbank erosion is also a very common phenomenon in the area. The series of cyclones, as mentioned by Upasana over the past decades, have caused severe damage to these embankments, allowing water to enter these agriculture fields, destroy livelihood of the local people who are dependent on agriculture. There's also an issue of proper maintenance of the embankments. Because the embankments are not maintained properly, the worsening of the impact of the river erosion has been happening over the years. For example, in the aftermath of Cyclone Lyla in 2009, these coastal areas were severely damaged by storm surge. A vast area was submerged underwater for a very long period of time. Because of that, the area became extremely saline. People could not conduct their regular farming activities. It was too saline for farming, too saline for growing crops or fisheries. Livelihood in the area is mainly dependent on agriculture, riverine and marine fishing, and Sundarban-dependent livelihood activities such as honey and betel leaf collection. For example, livelihood through agriculture, rice farming was historically a very common livelihood practice in the region. However, over the past years, salinity has been a severe issue in the area, and because of the increase in salinity, there is a decrease in agricultural productivity. Farming is not the same as it used to be, and many of the areas are actually not even suitable for farming at all. Rice and vegetables can in fact only be grown in the monsoon season when there's rainfall. So these are rain-fed cultivation. For the rest of the year, farmers have to either opt for seasonal migration or engage in alternative livelihood options. So a two-season rice production is no longer possible because without rainfall, the soil in the region is too saline to grow rice. So the increase in salinity of the region has a direct impact on agriculture. The other mode of livelihood in the region is fisheries. Culturally, fisheries is one of the main staples in the national diet, and most of the protein in the region also comes from consuming fish. Subsistence fisheries is of great importance in Bangladesh, including the Sundarbans. While small fishes are caught for feeding families, anything of commercial value is sold in the market. So there is a direct use of coastal and marine resources, particularly fisheries, in the market-oriented way. So salinity also impacts freshwater fish species, as these cannot grow in harsh saline conditions and are no longer able to be cultivated. In addition, a vast majority of the people living in the region also depend on the Sundarbans for their livelihood. So the Sundarbans forest forms the single largest continuous mangrove forest, and it is a source of ecosystem services and livelihood opportunities for all those, for a vast majority of the population living in the area. There are five main resources that are collected from the Sundarbans, which includes fish, crabs, honey, nipa leaves, and timber. In the past years, entering the Sundarbans has actually become more difficult as it requires formal passes. But when we talk to the community members, they share that even if they do have formal passes to enter the Sundarbans, there is a lot of issues of taking bribes, which it makes it more difficult to access the Sundarbans. There are also issues of theft. So people, the money that they earn after working the entire day can easily be theft. So that is also an issue. A recent study showed that it's usually the poorer households that are more dependent on Sundarbans rather than the more better off families. So people who do not have land are more dependent on livelihood resources from the Sundarbans. Data from the BBS shows that villages skirting the Sundarbans are actually some of the poorest, 42, with 42% living below the poverty line, mainly because near the Sundarbans, there are limited non-forest forms of income. Okay, so over the years, there has been a shift in the livelihood patterns. So the changes in ecology and climatic shocks resulted in people shifting from first from agriculture to shrimp, because when the soil became too saline, people could not do the traditional agriculture. As a result, they had to move to shrimp farming, which can sustain in more saline conditions. However, over the years, shrimp farming has proven to be more volatile. And as a result, people shifted towards crab farmings because crab is more resilient to extreme salinity and it is more lucrative and profitable in the area. If you go to the area now, you can see acres and acres of crab farms farming both soft shell crabs and hard shell crabs in the area. Most of these is imported, so to China, to Hong Kong and Singapore. And most of the local people in the region work in crab farms as day laborers. So during the month of lockdowns, I think at the beginning of the lockdown, we had the chance to visit the area, and they were saying that because of the lockdown situation, the borders were closed, and which is why many of the crab farms were also closed. So globalization in this case have actually affected their daily livelihood, because when the crab farms were closed, they did not have anything to do, and they are day laborers, so they depended on this for their daily livelihood. A lot of other shifts are also happening. We spoke to someone recently who shared that animal rearing habits are also changing. People used to farm chicken, but now some of the people have shifted to turkey farming because turkey is apparently more adaptable to harsher weather conditions in comparison to chicken. So it's an interesting slight shift in food preferences based by the weather and environmental conditions. There are also more deliberate initiatives that are being taken to shift the livelihood patterns. And one of this is aquageoponics, which is soil-less agriculture, which is also practiced in the area. We'll talk about that in a little more detail further on. And this is when people grow crops and vegetables and fishes in a dike pond system. Okay, so survival over identity. So when we spoke to the people, we asked them about their identity and how they feel about their identity of being dependent on the Sundarbans, working in the Sundarbans. And while most of the people are proud of where they live, they're not stuck with the idea that they have to live there. I think for most people, if they find better livelihood opportunities elsewhere, they wouldn't mind availing it. This is especially true for those without land. So this is more true for those without land. When we asked them that, is this an identity that you want to pass on to your children? They said that dependency on the Sundarbans leads to a very dangerous and uncertain life, and they do not want that for their children. They treat this job more as a necessity and not necessarily a part of their core identity. When we're talking about shifts, not all shifts have been positive. There have been some maladaptive shifts. And a primary example of this is the expansion of shrimp farming. So shrimp farming was not a direct consequence of climate change adaptation. Shrimp farming started happening in the 1990s when it became more difficult to continue traditional agriculture in these lands. This brought massive shifts in land use, and the area became crowded with countless small and large shrimp farms. But when the shrimp farms started expanding, it's more the absentee farmers and the businessmen who benefited from this because they invested in large-scale industrial farms. The other issue with shrimp farming is shrimp farms require less labor than agriculture, which is why a lot of people became jobless. And the small scale, the neighboring land, which is skirting the large shrimp farms, also became more saline, which made it difficult for those who cannot afford shrimp farming to continue doing agriculture in the region, causing mass migration as well. In recent times, however, people do not trust shrimp farming as much anymore because it has proven to be more volatile, especially for small scale farmers. And when we spoke to some of the people, they shared that if given the opportunity, they would still prefer to do agriculture because they feel like agriculture is a more safer way of living. I'll just go to the next slide. So if we talk about migration, migration is a very common thing in the region, and they treat it as part of their daily life, be it seasonal or permanent migration. When we spoke to the local people, they share that it's usually the male members of the area who migrate, both seasonally and permanently, and the motivation is mainly linked with income generation. So seasonal migration is very common. This is something that will happen every year. This is because as I mentioned previously, half of the year you can do agricultural activities, but for the other half of the year, you cannot. And when you cannot do agricultural activities and you don't have alternative livelihood in the area, you have no jobs in the area, which is why during these months, people usually migrate to nearby cities such as Khulna, Bagherhat, or Dhaka. And some people even cross the border to work in India with permits. And this is a very regular process that they've grown up with, and it's a very common part of their life. It's not something they particularly mind. It's usually the young men who tend to do this. However, some women also can, but women are usually less able to. In case of permanent migration, this is less common, and it happens more with middle and low income groups with little or no land. So it is usually the poorer groups who have to do permanent migration because of the loss of livelihood opportunities in their land. I am aware that I might be going a little too slow because I saw Terry appear on the screen, so I'll just rush through the rest of the
yes,
presentation.
I
Thank
think
you.
maybe rather than rush, pick out some key points.
Yes, I will do. Thank you
Thanks.
for the quick reminder. I did realize that. So in case of vulnerabilities, while we do acknowledge that most people in the area are vulnerable to some extent, some are definitely more vulnerable than others. We've noted that the ethnic minorities, specifically the Munda community, which is an indigenous group living in the region, they're very vulnerable because they rely solely on NGO support for their livelihood, because they don't have the links and the networks with government officials or political leaders. Oftentimes they have no right to land, and they mostly work as day laborers, which is a very vulnerable sort of livelihood. The same for the landless. The poorest groups usually settle in the outskirts of wards, which are ignored by NGOs, which makes them highly vulnerable. Not only is the area where they settle more volatile as it is, but it's also ignored more often because it doesn't fall within the ward, which means it gets ignored by bureaucracies. Women are generally more vulnerable because due to social constraints, they're not always able to migrate for better livelihood. And they also get paid half as much as men do for working the same sort of hours. Adaptation in the region, as mentioned before, adaptation in the region has been happening for many years. And this is because Bangladesh has been recognized as a climate hotspot before India. Adaptation initiatives in the region has also started before it did in the Indian Sundarbans region, which is why a lot of the things happened in Bangladesh first and are still happening in India now. And there's a huge opportunity for transboundary learning in this case, because we've already done some of the things which has worked and which haven't worked. And we are looking forward to pass that knowledge onwards. So the perceptions of transformative adaptation. So when we ask the local people, what would be transformative to you? For most people whose main intent is to survive the daily, something as vague as transformative, something so far in the future, it made no sense. They didn't understand what, they are more concerned with their daily income and daily life. But when we did ask, like, what would you want your future generation? What would you want for your children? Just in case climate change and environmental threats overwhelm the system, what do you want for them? What would make them survive? And they shared that they would want them to be educated and trained, because training on alternative livelihood is something that will allow their children to explore a wider range of opportunities and actually break free of these vulnerabilities. When we ask the same questions. Yes, sorry.
Really, we'll have to move on to the Indian side very soon. So
I'm going to move on.
Access.
I think Yeah,
People
I'll
will have
share these
access to
slides
the
if
slide.
anyone wants to. Yeah, okay, I'll do that right now. I'll just conclude these slides. So I think when we asked the same questions to NGOs and practitioners, we got a very similar response where training and education was highlighted as one of the key things to be passed on for things to be transformative. There are some examples of transformative adaptation, which I'm happy to share later on. But in the interest of time, I'll pass it on to my colleague Upasona, who'll talk a little bit about the Indian Sundarbans. I'm really sorry for taking so much time. And if anyone's interested in the presentation, I'll share it with them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shababa. So basically, you haven't wasted any time. You have shared the ground realities, which is definitely very similar in Indian part. So that's why, Shababa was talking about the perception of the local people, perception of the NGOs, and the transformative initiatives. So definitely these things are very, very, very similar in Indian part too. So next slide, please. Tasfia, can you change? Directly go to the next one because we have already covered this ecological uncertainty points in both me and Shababa has already talked about it. So, can you please move the previous slide? Yeah, please stay a bit here. So see what we were trying to capture in, and that's like how the livelihood pattern due to as an impact of climate change or as an impact of many other drivers like the globalization, like the recurrent cyclones and floods and rapid land erosions, the entire livelihood has a kind of in a transitional phase. So the economy of the Sundarbans in both the countries, which were mostly on self-sufficient, production, they based on their own production, now changing towards a caste-based economy. So previously, if we see that's, forest collection, agriculture, fishing, prawn seed collections, those were the, traditional livelihood of the people of the Sundarbans. They shifted a bit in terms of bitter leaf cultivation, especially in the Indian part. Then again, when they trying to lose their when they are losing their lands and losing the agricultural field due to the salinity, they shifted towards the agricultural or any kind of wage laboring. As a byproduct, especially in the Indian part, it has crab catching has emerged as a upcoming livelihood. But at the end, which is a present situation, is the migration, the seasonal, especially the male migration, is most relevant options for people to move out of the Sundarbans to get the alternative livelihoods. So can we say this as a livelihood transition, or it is just a coping mechanism by the people to be in a livelihood flexibility while living in this kind of uncertain scenarios? So that is a point we are trying to answer in our research also. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So if we look into the Indian part of the Sundarbans, the migration patterns are manifold. So one is definitely a permanent out migrations, specifically by the rural elite who has got the educations well, and they want to have a kind of a aspiration to have a city life. And as the mega city Kolkata is very near to Sundarban, you could find many small urbanized town in the vicinity of in between the Sundarbans and the Kolkata. So people, a sizable amount of people are moving from the rural Sundarbans to the city Kolkata. The second type of seasonal migrations is definitely there, especially by the male. It's kind of a coping after every disaster. You will see an influx of migration. Male are migrating more than females, and this phenomena of male migrations is getting reflected in the emergence of de facto woman-headed households. So you will find many woman-headed households within the Indian part of the Sundarbans, and who have which is putting the women of the Sundarbans in terms of triple burden of work. They have to look after their children, they have to take part in the restoration of the livelihood, as well as they have to do the household chores. So another crucial type of, we can say it's a migrations through marriage, or it's in disguise of human trafficking. Young girls are very vulnerable. They are the main victim of sex trafficking. We talked with the NGOs who are working in the trafficking issues, the Indian part of Sundarbans, and they said that they have estimated that after every cyclones or every disaster, the Kolkata's brothels have increased number of women and girls from the Sundarbans. So boys as young as 14 to 15 years, they are also joining in terms of the marginal workforce. And this is a crucial issue and a very hush-hush issue, because there are no policies, there are no kind of strong initiatives to stop this or to deal with this kind of migrations. Next slide, please. So there is another type of things that's due to the forest policies, due to the changing in the livelihood pattern, we could see in the ground that people tend to lose their faith or their beliefs in the cult of Bon Bibi. So maybe the migration is one result, and they are more tend to believe on the mainstream goddess like Kali and Durga or Islam. So this is a social transition which is a byproduct or a cascading impact of the climate change induced livelihood uncertainties, we can say. But we need to dig more, need to dig further and prepare a strong case for this also. So we are just in it's a very superficial at this present. We will definitely in this project try to build these cultural transitions upfront. Next slide, please. So governance and policies, basically in the Indian part of Sundarbans is a very small region divided into 2 districts. We have a junior departments like Sundarbans Affair departments, and we have Sundarbans Development Board. So, but besides that, the policies main focus is on the infrastructural development of the region, which is again contested by the scholars. Maybe one of our panelists, Amites, has done a lot of work on that. He could say better. So there is a focus on the disaster risk reductions. There is very lack of coordination between the civil societies and the state. And there is no population of knowledge between the scientific society and into the policies. So very limited reflections of scientific knowledge into policies. So lack of participations of the local people in terms of CBOs, NGOs, in the planning and implementations make the situation more severe. Next slide, please. So adaptation versus man adaptation. So here we have seen this kind of things that Bangladesh has done this kind of adaptation towards the climate change previous than the Indian part. So if we take the example of shrimp farming, so it has been proven that it is not going to be a sustainable option for the people living in the Sundarban Delta. But in the Indian part, we are doing that. We have started in many places. We have started the shrimp farming. So here, it's can we say it adaptation or can we say it's a maladaptation? And what about the transboundary learning in this kind of things? There are another issue like, large concrete embankments. So after Lyla, the government has received a huge grant to build the concrete embankment in the Sundarbans regions. But from scientific literatures and from the many scholars' work, we know that it's a riverine system. It cannot hold, it's a concrete embankment. It's not a solution. So there is a lack between the science and the policy. The infrastructural development, that is the major focus. Can we say an adaptation or a maladaptation? The question raised here. Focus on the disaster risk reduction. Definitely, it has done a lot of work in the Indian part of the Sundarbans in terms of flood center, in terms of other initiatives. But where is the focus for a long-term adaptation? So this, I'm just going through rapidly because we have our panelists to reflect on these issues. Terry, next, Tasfia, next slide, please. Yeah, so co-production produced initiatives to tackle the changes, especially in terms of Indian part of Sundarbans. We have civil societies, a very strong presence of civil society. We have researchers, scientists, and relevant departments of government universities, including the social science researchers like Annu, Amites, Anurag. There are a lot of people. We have relevant government departments, national and international journalists. We have a long network of journalism in Sundarbans, as far as Sundarbans is concerned. We have transboundary researchers and activists, and they are producing constantly the knowledge, alternatives, and natural restoring, try to restore the natural resources and try to do the community engagement and as a policy process. Next slide, please. So major initiatives, especially in part of the Sundarban, Indian part of the Sundarbans, are the salinity resistant crops, brackish aquaculture, crab cultivation, commercial sim farming, aquageophonics, green college, sack garden. I'm not going to read all this because these most of the people who are working in part of the Sundarbans, they knew that these are the initiatives. Definitely these initiatives, next slide please. Definitely these initiatives have some transformative elements. They are based in the local traditional knowledge, especially the salinity resistant crops and other green college or other initiatives. They have the potential to create the alternatives as the Sundarbans is concerned. They have the potential resources to distribute across the various sections of communities. They have some kind of gender inclusive lenses. And at the same time, they are sustainable. They could be sustainable in future. Next slide, please. So how we can think this initiatives towards transformative changes? What are the challenges we are facing now, and what are the opportunities we have? So the big challenge is the robust scale up of this potential transformative initiatives in both the countries. Especially Lyla, as Lyla mentions, that our whole project is a patchwork, is a tapestry. So presently all these initiatives are very scratchy and patchy in terms of their catchment, in terms of their, we need an integration in this process. The stronger linkages between the partnerships, the local government and the civil societies can scale up these initiatives, and they have the potential. Equitable distribution of the resources. All these initiatives in both the countries are very, very, top down, and in somewhere they are not equitably distributed to the poorest of the poor. So maybe it's a salinity resistant crops. Then what about the distribution of the seeds to the people? So we need a stronger policies and implementation guideline to be in place, especially incorporating the local voices. Next slide, please.
We really do need to finish, so just pick up the highlights.
This is maybe the last slide.
Yeah, but very quick highlight.
So what we need to focus on we need to shift our focus from the community based from the community led. So I mean, maybe I'm talking about vice versa. It should be a community led other than a community based initiatives. So all these initiatives in terms of transboundary learning, we need to think how we can think about Sundarbans as a unified region, because we never share both the countries. Maybe we have political debates between us, but we never share the learnings with each other. So that's maybe there are a lot of players working in this regions, in this two politically divided region. So we need to club how we can think about unified ecosystem and how we can share our learning so that we can have a better future for the people of Sundarbans. So that is the discussion, that is the things that we would also like to listen from our panelists, and all of them have worked a lot in this regions. So I'm not going to discuss any further. So maybe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful and very rich. We need to move very quickly to bring in, I know there are several questions in the chat box, but we will have to take them at the very end so that we can finish the program and have the benefit of the discussants. So I'd like to hand over now to Mahmuda Mity, who is from ICCCAD, who is going to be with Shibaji Bose, who is an independent communications specialist, to talk about the visual aspects of the research. So Shibaji, is it you going first?
Yes. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes. So the next presentation, this presentation is a visual storytelling session from which we will aim to sketch issues of vivencia, lived experiences, representing climate change, uncertainty, and transformative actions in both Bangladesh and Indian Sundarbans. We have attempted to involve and facilitate the transboundary research through participatory visual action research techniques like photo voice, through visual ethnography, through involving the women and youths into voicing their perspectives. Through this presentation, we will try to bring to you the tales from the vantage point of the islanders, mainly the women and the youth of Sundarban. And before we go on to the next slide, if I need to talk a bit more of the photograph. So this is striking photograph is of a participant of photo voice, and now the striking feature is she's from a very remote block, block in the Pathar Protima, and this is the first time she's using any electronic devices. So it was a challenge for us, but at the same time, we will come up with the narratives and the photos that they have shown in the photo voice. Next slide, please. So our colleagues Upasona and Shababa has already talked about this. Now, this is a photo taken by one of the photo voice women participants to depict the uncertainty of living in that geography. The premise of the current transboundary visual methods project is that the knowledge of uncertainty and transformation is built from shared experience and action that is not limited to the scientists and the modelers and the policymakers and the above. So what we are trying to depict is social struggles and transformation and use of popular knowledge, which do have a role to play in exposing evidence and new perspectives on equitable access and social justice. Next slide, please. So in photo voice, the women of the research is also the inquirer who builds knowledge from direct shared experience, engaging in self-reflective action and seeking knowledge in transformation. Through the visual method, Tapestry recognizes knowledge as plural, reflective, subjective, and transformative. So we are doing photo voice method in all 4 sites. The 2 sites already was there in the Tapestry session. Now, this method provides a wide berth to the community members to frame problems in ways that are seen as relevant and appropriate to their knowledge and lived experiences. For this session, we will be focusing on the transboundary component. And my colleague Mahmuda will talk about photo elicitation and documentary photography, about the effects of big shocks, compounded uncertainties, and local adaptation towards the later part of this presentation. Next slide, please. So drawing from the photo voice co-production and transformation theme, this method attempts to tease out forms of knowledge that are often overlooked or undervalued by more traditional forms of research. And we had this group of mothers, 87 women who worked as co-researchers from 5 different groups. And it was a huge process, as you can see from the snapshots, making them to use the cameras, facilitating the pilots, and to the entire process of taking shots and discussions and debates amongst the group members, and then finally presenting it to the policymakers and the local and also at the state. Next slide, please. So if you see, these were the women who were in the groups. So one thing we had sense to do from the beginning, because to have more heterogeneity in our groups, so that we were alert in capturing the perspectives and voices of all sections of the locality, and not only from, as is often seen, the so-called community key people. Next slide, please. So this is, this theme has been captured by the women, a lot of the women across these 5 groups. These were constantly photographed by the participants during high tides, during flash floods, and also in the aftermath of big ticket disasters like Amphan and Lyla. This, when we asked them, said about their quest for settling onto a higher land, which is less flooded, away from the periphery of the island, and to the center part of an island, near the peri-urban location, the Sundarbans, and near Kolkata. And so this is a recurrent theme that came up in this from the photographs, on the photo voice method. Next slide, please. So this slide shows photographs of salinity ingress, which they say that these are the silent killers. Now these, you see the photograph, they're flooding sweetwater ponds being flooded, leaving the agricultural land unfit for cultivation, fish dying. Now, when we asked them why did you take these photographs, they said that they were concerned about the lack of food security and the food variety for the children. And there other studies have actually said about increasing instances of undernourished children. Next slide, please. So this is this on the left. You will see as they have photographed, this photo also had come time and again of migration as a major coping strategy. And also, if you see the boat, it's mainly the male. The male migration is something that's very common. There are islands and remote parts which are more prone to the shocks, are affected more by the shocks. Entire population from 16 to 55 male population has just deserted the village. And on the right, the women photographed this because they said they were trying new things like poultry, duckery. We would have loved to have cows and goats, but high salinity has devoided them of the pastoral commons, some of which is drowned in the river. And on the lower picture, it is about the duckery and poultry, and because they don't have to spend as much on food. And the last picture, the third picture on the right hand top, it's an interesting story how they had earlier into prawn cultivation and they have now shifted to the crab cultivation. That too, they attributed it to the increase in salinity in water. Next slide, please.
Mickey, sorry, you will need to speed up. I'm very sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Stacey. I will. So slide 9 is they said about the triple burden of war, about the responsibility, and that was something that came from the pictures from the growing female-headed households. So they had to do it because they had to complement the money, or when the money doesn't come during times of COVID, there has also been an increase in incidences of tiger mauling and death as a result of this risky professions, the crab collections. And they have to take care of the additional extended family and taking care of the children. Next slide, please. So all these pictures, if you see, this is about care seeking that has come up from the women, care seeking amongst climate change and the silent increase in the disease burden. And this has resulted in reliance on quacks or informal providers who do treatments and medicine on credit. And they are taking recourse to the home remedies because there are no doctors, because movement was difficult during the pandemic. And some of the pictures we'll see are focused, not focused, but at the same time, we relied on the narrative, not in the quality of pictures in this process. Next slide, please. As you see, these are the mundane tales of the daily existence of these women, but it's reflected from the situations in the daily day-to-day lives. In this photo, the concerns of child care, what is implicit is how climate change and increasing adverse big climate events, and see, they have gradually taken their toll in the lives of the women. It was evident from Cyclone Amphan that whole swaths of territory, if you see the right-hand picture, which had a strong mangrove cover, was safe from the worst vagaries. And they say that this is something we know from our experience of Cyclone Lyla. We work with government and civil societies to plant saplings. We do it free of cost, as we know the benefit the mangroves would accrue us in the long run. Slide next slide, please. So this photo was presented to the policymakers. Now that was the objective of this process, was to get the evidence from this iterative learning to provide new insights and perspectives, and will thus combine scientific knowledge with lay knowledge. And we thought that this is itself an agent of change, of transformation. So some of they could achieve a lot through these presentations to the policymakers, having all-weather roads, 24/7 medical staff. This was actually taken in Kultuli, drinking water, and embankments. Next slide, please. So these are some of the stuff that they couldn't capture through the photo voice, and they said during the discussion, there's the domestic violence and has increased, and it mostly does, they say, when the male are out of work, like COVID and infant taking a toll, and there is a lot of stress in the family, and we now have to think what will we eat next week. It's about survival now. And then talk about intergenerational gap, the stress of the triple burden of work on women, has a lot of them wanting a nuclear family. And they talked about remote controlling by the husband. They said that if women have access to funds and decision making, we can deal better with the climate vagaries. Next slide, please. So we asked them, because one of the aim of the participatory action research is to enable the change within. What did they feel within? These are the various verbatims that came. You can read it. I'm feeling like doing a man's job, and they said that they can now go to meetings, represent their community. So this is what about the photo voice. And if I will give it to Mahmuda now, who will take us forward. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Shibaji. Tasfia, next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about photo elicitation and participatory photography. So photo elicitation is a method of interview in visual sociology research that uses visual image to Tasfia, one slide back, please. Please go to the previous slide. Yeah, that one. So photo elicitation is a method of interviews in visual. I'm not sure of what is happening here. Tasfia, can you just go in slide number 15?
Is it okay now, Mahmuda?
No, it will be like a picture with a destroyed house. Yeah, that one. Yeah, thank you.
Correct,
Yeah. Sorry, the photo elicitation is a method of interview in visual sociology research that uses visual image of illicit comments. The type of image used include photographs, videos, paintings, cartoons, and so on. And participatory photography is another method that involves community members using photography creatively to make a different in improving their environment. So though cyclone is not new to them, suddenly the dual burden of COVID and Amphan increased the uncertainty in that area. So the local community, especially youth, took a few pictures of the disaster to show us like what happened during and after Cyclone Amphan. So here are some pictures of it as a part of photo elicitation and participatory photography in both Bangladesh and Indian Sundarban side. Next slide, please. So these two pictures shows how their houses were destroyed during Cyclone Amphan. Next slide, please. Yeah, in this picture of the left slide, left side, a woman and a man have lost their house and become destitute. In the picture of the right side, we can see a man is sitting on the street helpless as his land has been washed away by the riverbank erosion. Next slide, please. So this picture actually shows an electric pole falling into a house and causing two casualties. Next slide, please. So in this picture of the left side shows that many poultries died due to flooding in the domestic area, and in the picture of the right side shows that many fishes died due to saline water flooding in the domestic ponds, which is like resulting a lot of financial losses. Next slide, please. Besides all of these losses, like we can see many agricultural land were submerged in the flood waters, for which all the crops of that land were ruined and no cultivation could be done in that area for many days. Next slide, please. So here we can see that the section of embankment washed away during Cyclone Amphan, and in the right side we can see that a road of the primary school cut off, for uh, for which the children couldn't go to school for many days. Next slide, please. The local people took several steps as an immediate initiatives. So for example, in the picture of the left side, we can see an old man lying in a temporary house built by the local community. But he still suffers for uncertainty about what he will do next if another disaster hits in the same area. People were also struggling to ensure safe drinking water. In the right side picture, we can see how they are collecting drinking water by crossing a water body. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so however, we shouldn't forget that we had this super cyclone during the COVID pandemic. For us, this is just a cyclone, but for them, it is another disaster for increasing uncertainties. Sorry. So they are maintaining hygiene to come up from this COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. So this picture is showing that they are repairing their river dam with the collaboration of local chairmen, local communities, and CBOs. On the right, on the other hand, the picture on the right side was taken 3 months after the cyclone Amphan. Actually, that time there was a high tide in Bangladesh, so that the river embankment broke and the whole village was submerged. However, not much has been written in the newspaper or covered in the television news about this silent disaster. Next slide, please. So these pictures are some examples of the locally led adaptation practices in the tapestry patches, uh, which has helped the people of the area to turn around after the disaster like Cyclone Amphan and during the COVID. So they have started vegetable gardening and fishing at their home uh, by maintaining proper distance. Next slide, please. And this is also another example of the locally led adaptation practices from the tapestry patches. The picture of the left side is showing how the local are conserving seeds of the traditional saline resilient and bioorganic varieties. And in the right side, we can see how they are storing the traditional vegetable seeds varieties. Next slide, please. So our future plan is to conduct a transboundary photo voice. We had planned to do this a long time ago, but we haven't started yet due to COVID. However, we are planning to start it soon. We are also aiming to involve children for painting, reimagining the space, like how they want to see the art or how they want to react with climate change and uncertainties, all of these things. So we have Another one is digital diaries. So since we cannot go directly to the Sundarban due to COVID, we have started working with the digital diaries method as an alternative plan. So it's all from my side. Yeah. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahmuda and Shivaji, for that really, really interesting insight. I think getting the sight of the people and their conditions is really, really important. We're really short of time, and I do want to make sure that we do have the comments and from our three discussants. And hopefully there'll be time for a few questions at the end, because there are a couple in the chat box. So what I would like to do is to immediately hand over to Annu Jalais, who's from the National University of Singapore, for the first set of comments. Annu, are you ready there, please? Thank you so much.
I really enjoyed the PowerPoint. It was so well made, and it raised quite a few important issues. So you wanted my comments in relation to some of the points raised in the PowerPoint? Yeah.
Sorry, Annu, I think you can decide how you would like to use your time yourself. Did it provoke any particular?
Do you want me to go first, or should I be in conversation with Amites, or I can just say a few things. If
Amitesh and Nadir, if you want to turn on your cameras and microphones, then you can just feed in as you want and feed
because
off each other if you want.
We just have 20 minutes, so I thought it might be best perhaps to be in conversation.
That's fine. Yeah.
And add in to what
yes.
the
So
other two.
Amitesh and Nadir, would you like to turn on and join us?
Sorry, Terry, can you just start my video, because I can't, it seems that the host has stopped it, so it doesn't allow me to restart my video, although I unmuted myself.
All right, Annu, you start and then we'll try and sort that out.
Great. So how is climate change affecting the well-being of the people? One of the points raised. And recently, Amitesh and I have, we wrote a piece on Amphan, but we are now writing a piece on managed retreat. Amitesh, would you like to say a few words on this? In relation to, what are the initiatives also addressing climate change challenges in the Sundarban? I suppose this is something quite new, which hasn't been mentioned at all in the PowerPoint, which I think could be something we could just talk about briefly. And the other point I wanted to talk about briefly was perhaps mental health issues and migration. I think these 2 points are quite important. And I just want to mention some of the scholars doing some tremendous work on the region for those of you interested in the Sundarban. So.
Yeah, thanks very much, Anu. Yeah, I must thank the presenters. Lyla's brief introduction and subsequent presentation by Upasona, Shababa, Shibaji, and I think Mahmood for the intellectual and the material context to sort of try and talk a little more about how we kind of place ourselves in relation to this entire discourse about climate change, managed retreat, and all that has been invoked in trying to protect this place, trying to protect people, maybe trying to think of certain solutions for people by those who do not always come from Sundarban itself, but from outside. And of course, we've written this article, and we are in the middle of yet another write-up and the piece on the managed retreat. And the reason why we thought that we should write something on the managed retreat question is that it's been once again an attempt to sort of try and handle this whole question of climate change, moving out of the place in situ solution to the problems of the
Sorry, I can't see. Can anyone see who that is? Right. Okay.
sorry.
Carry on, Amites.
Yeah.
I
So,
muted them, don't worry.
okay. Yeah. So, these were some of the pressing concerns which informed us, as to why we wanted to write about managed retreat. And one of the things that, and I must thank Tapestry, ICCCAD, and this whole initiative to think about Sundarbans beyond boundaries, and the reason why we should do this, I think at this point in time is because this whole idea of the Sundarbans, the boundary-based understanding of the Sundarbans is kind of goes against the whole understanding of Sundarban as it's mediated by our historical understanding, historical perspective. The reason being that each disaster, including the recent one, Amphan, tells us how important it is to sort of go back, in history, in retrospect, and look at this region as being part of the Gangetic Delta, where there has been initiative to sort of, settle people on lands which were highly unsettling, and more importantly, to turn unsettling land into settled sources of revenue, which I think is the beginning of the way in which we must, sort of reverse the lens with which we had looked at this region, and because this whole idea of turning this unsettling place into something of a settled source of revenue is the land-water dichotomy, which has been central to the whole idea of land making in the region. And today, this whole idea of a managed retreat, I think, takes us into this entire plane of how important it is that we need to reconstruct this dichotomy, the land water. And whereas the livelihood practices, the ways in which people mingle with this landscape, the ways in which people relate to their everyday life around different issues of the Delta, reflect a deeper connection and a deeper acknowledgement of this fluidity of this demarcation, and time and again we are reminded of how fluid, fluidity of the landscape is something which completely sort of completely unsettles our whole concern and engagement with the need categories, and from the instances of embankment making to the shrimp agriculture, shrimp industry, and the whole idea of berry making, the fisheries, the way in which sudden centralized development initiative which had made embankment building and making possible in places time and again reminds us how our need categories often jumble into a set of contradictions which completely, sort of completely throw into complete disarray our concern with how we want to give people land that they so much desire, and how we must return water and forest to the wildlife. But the whole way in which this whole practice, the livelihood and otherwise, the way it unfolds in the Delta, time and again tells us deeply that there are, diversity of desires and diversity of rationalities, which I think are much more found layered into people's livelihood practices, found minutely textured into ways in which people engage forest, land, and water on an everyday basis, time and again in the Delta.
Thank you,
And this is,
Amitesh. Can I bring
this
in,
is, I think, is the
sorry,
crucial
could I
point
just
that
bring in
we
Nadir
must.
here?
And this is something which I think is very important, that the anti-top down development initiatives that we've been speaking about must look into. I think I should stop here for now, and then maybe Nadir would be able to sort of reflect. Uh,
Thank you. Nadir, do you want to come in? Nadir, can you hear me? He's not. Annu, until he's online.
I was struggling to mute. I think my control was being seized.
We've lost your connection, so we'll come back to you. Annu,
Hello?
do you want to come in first?
My control was being seized by the host for a minute, and then I was being given control.
Okay. All right. So Annu, do you want to go first?
Okay.
Shall I go ahead?
Yes, I thought Amitesh's point was very important here in relation to how do we think of the future for this region. And I quite liked this PowerPoint. Really, thank you very much to Upasona and Shababa for it. What I remember in one of the slides was this the importance of survival over identity, and it's something that I also noticed in people in the Sundarban, that they are not really keen to pass on what they know about the forest or this region to their children. And if they have any kind of opportunity to leave and to have a better life elsewhere, they usually do so. So it's very interesting. There is absolutely no love lost for, or romanticization for the land like you would in other parts of Bengal. So this is something that one needs to remember. Um, and I think that this is also shared all over Bengal where people do not have land. There is people very easily have migrated and still do migrate, just as 300 years ago, people came from other parts in Bengal and Bihar to settle in the Sundarban because suddenly these islands were revenue generating ones, or at least that's what the British wanted. And so these big mud walls were built around them so that they would be protected from tidal waters, and they could be then um, growing paddy. And the only problem is that it didn't work as well as the British hoped, and this is why at some point they didn't pursue, and they did not really take over the entirety of the Sundarban. And so this is something that I felt was a very good point made in the PowerPoint. The other point that wasn't made too much, and something that I'm interested in currently, is how people view migration and how people view their own lack um, of you know the lack of opportunities for them to move elsewhere. This is something that very often creates a lot of unhappinesses and even mental issues, mental trauma for a lot of people in the younger generation. So 20 years ago, when I started fieldwork in the Sundarban, along with Amitesh, we were both working on different islands, but it was great to have a colleague also working on the Sundarban, because the only people we had read before them were the British gazetteer writers, the biologists, and medical doctors who were working on mental health issues. People like Michael Weiss and Aurobindo Chaudhuri were the only ones who were writing about the Sundarban at that time, apart from, of course, the scientists, as I said. So it was something, it was a realm that I was always interested in, but I thought, okay, they know what they're doing. They're the psychiatrists. And now with Man Barua's work and people talking about eco-psychiatry, I think that this is something that needs to be explored in the region. To what extent are people, you know, uh, living a certain kind of mental health problems because of the environment in which they're in, because of the vulnerability of their everyday lives, and perhaps because of mismatched aspirations, an aspiration to move out, to be able to do better. For example, a lot of them left after Ayla, and you know that with the completely unplanned lockdown that happened both in Bangladesh and in India, but that in Bangladesh it just lasted about 6 weeks, whereas in India it went on for a few months. And what happened was that a lot of migrant workers from the Sundarban returned. And over the last few years, there were about 4 to 5 people killed by tigers in the West Bengal Sundarban. This year, there were more than 20 people killed by tigers. And this was because all these migrants had returned. They had no way of feeding their kids. So they were going into the forest to catch crabs, fish, to collect honey, and they were killed. So, and these are just the ones we get to know about. A lot of them, as you can imagine, went without a permit, and perhaps were not even declared. So this is something that for me is a very interesting new development, because over the last few years we had been seeing how people were leaving this region. Um, and suddenly, because of the lockdown and COVID-19, people have been returning and trying to make a living in this place. And this sort of coincided with Amphan in May. It was just around the same time that they were returning. So it would be interesting to see what happens over there. I just wanted to talk, just briefly mention the few people who are doing some extraordinary work on the Sundarban. There is Kasia Paproki, Shapan Adnan. Of course, all of you know these names. They've been talking a lot about climate change and the NGO sector. And some new work is by Camelia Dewan, whose book is coming out very soon with Washington University Press. And she's been looking at fishing and shrimp farming and the construction of embankments and climate change and rivers in Bangladesh. And it's an excellent book. Um, so you have also, of course, so on the one side, as I was telling you, you have Shapan Adnan, Kasia Paproki, Aditya Ghosh, who were talking about a sort of, talking about managed retreat along with the WWF people. Um, and I really don't know how that can ever be put in place in a region, which has at least 10 million people between Bangladesh and India in the most active islands, or the southern islands, just before the Sundarban, just above the Sundarban forest. So this will mean moving how many millions? 3 millions, 4 millions? In the past, with big dams, people have been similarly moved. And where have they found space? Only in slums, and they have just gone poorer. So before thinking of some sort of managed retreat from this area, it would be good to think about why. And this excuse given that this was inhabited only 300 years ago, I don't think is a very good one. Salt Lake in Kolkata, a place where a lot of ministers and IAS officers live, was also was actually cleared around 50 years ago. A place like Newtown was cleared even more recently. So how do we decide who is to move and where? So this is something that I thought, and a historian called Devjani Bhattacharya and anthropologist Meghna Mehta, Kaylin Dowler have all been writing some excellent work on the Sundarban and on rethinking, uh, you know, that space. And I think you should all look out for their articles and their books when they come.
Thank you, Annu.
Welcome.
I'd like to hand over to Nadia now, although, of course, your point is very well taken, but it wouldn't be 10 million people all at the same time. That would be over
But
quite a number of...
how many? Where do you stop? You know, so it's 10 million people between Bangladesh and India. And how, you know, at no point do I see a figure of, okay, so these are the islands, these are the places where we need to move people away from.
Thank you.
And where, you know, in the most populated part of the world, between Bangladesh and West Bengal, that space is the most populated in the world. Where would you put these people?
Well, on the Bangladesh, I don't want to speak as chairperson, but on the Bangladesh side, there's some quite interesting work which ICCCAD is doing on the idea of climate-friendly cities and towns, which would receive migrants, but they would be have an incentive to move rather than being made to move. And on the Bangladesh side, the discussion is not about any kind of forced migration at all. It's about providing alternatives and incentives. And I think that means that it would be a trickle, especially based around young people. I don't know if there's a session in this conference on it, but this is a serious discussion that's going away. I call it supported migration. It's not managed retreat. We have to take that terminology away from IPCC and use the terminology which I think is more people-friendly. I prefer the phrase supported migration. And of course, they won't ever go to any land. There's no land for them to go to. So this is about having a completely different kind of livelihoods, in which there is education and training, which fortunately is part of the results that we heard about just now in the photo voice. When people were asked what they would like for their children, it was exactly training and education so that they can do something different. And the people were not romantic about the idea that they should carry on living and struggling in that place. But I'm taking too much time, so I want to hand over to Nadia, please, because we paid him an awful lot of money, as we have you, of course, to do these comments. No. So I don't want to waste that money. Nadia.
Hi, thanks very much, Terry, for giving me the floor. And it was great to see the other panelists as well. I'm a great fan of Annu's work. I've been following her since 2007-8 and her works. So they're very brilliant. Anyway, but I actually want to start with a little bit different. And thanks very much, Shababa and the whole team for the nice presentation. But as I always think that being in the academia, one of the challenges is that we are often very polite and we often really are very much British in terms of telling the truth. So we always have a very veil of saying the truth. And one of that is particularly when we challenge the existing idea of who we really criminalize. For example, if I say that in the whole process, we really have not sort of pointed our finger very firmly towards the government or the infrastructure. They have been making those people living at the fringe very vulnerable. So that is one of the things which I think is very important. Why I'm saying that? For example, if I refer to the Bangladeshi Prime Minister, like when there was a sort of talk of installing the Rampal power plant, which is very close to the Sundarbans, then there was huge debate. And at some point, the Prime Minister was telling that some people, they love tigers than the human being, because people are talking about conservation of the forest. So that is how really you can see that the mindset of the government. It is same in the Indian part as well, because we have seen that at some point, Sahara, they were trying to sort of, conquer an island and convert that to the eco park in a way, which was being obstructed by the EIA in 2003. So, I mean, the governmental mindset is a huge issue. In Bangladesh part, what we see that since our independence in 1971, there are two public sectors where gradually the government's spending and investment has reduced. And one of them is education, the other one is health. So automatically, when health and education investment reduces gradually, we often make some people marginal. And that is where from 75 million people in 1970, now we have 160 million people. So automatically, the amount of risk that has, hugely risen up. So they are some of the things which probably we need to think of as a overall thing. For example, even when you talk about the stream farm, instead of criminalizing the stream farming, have we had the provision that only the people from that area, they can have the cooperative to operate the stream farm in that area? Maybe the vulnerability would have been very different than the land grabbers coming from the town and buying those land or evicting people from those areas. So these are different way of sort of seeing, and that is where in theory, when I see your theory of assisted or supported migration, in theory it is very possible, but in practice that is where the challenge is, because we really do not have very bottom up and development mindset in terms of supporting the poor or extreme marginal people. And that is what is happening around the Sundarbans as well. I mean, the first thing is that when we talk about this cross-border Sundarban initiative, one of the major challenge is that in terms of sort of working cross-border between, particularly between Bangladesh and India, where the political relationship is very sensitive, where we suddenly become very Bangladeshi or very Indian in our research. So, I mean, that is one of the area we have a different nationalistic angle of looking into the problem. And we never had a very open consensus or that thing, which really need to be clarified in this area. The other thing is that, and that is what we see, that the state mindset and the academia or activism mindset are very different. When India and Bangladesh collaboratively at the government level, they installed the Rampal, which is very close to the Sundarbans, and the environmental activists, they protest on that. And it is not only the Rampal, but also the overall, mega projects and very pro-rich development endeavors, which is happening around the Sundarbans. If you even remove those people from there, I don't think that that would really do very good for the Sundarbans. If we think about, the offshore, the seaports, or even, the mega projects, which is sort of being installed around the Sundarbans, and the way there are, different kind of invasion, developmental invasion within the Sundarbans, and that is taking place. And that is where probably we really need to hammer a little more from the academia and activism side, so that we can aware the government and we can tell them that there is something that they need to be care about, and their development initiatives need to be pro-poor. And that is probably where I stop, and I can take a few questions in that line. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadir. If I could follow that up immediately, very quickly, on this people-focused, people-based, I've been suggesting an idea of what I call a global Delta Peoples Solidarity Network. And if any of the people in the audience are interested in this, the basic idea is to have a people-to-people relationship across deltas. So we could start with those in West Bengal and link them with those in Bangladesh in that region. And I doubt whether they get to talk to each other very much at all. But also last year I went to the Mississippi Delta, to Louisiana and New Orleans, where of course they have cyclones as well, hurricanes, and get the people in there who face extremely difficult problems, which are very similar to those in Bangladesh, and actually have those people talking to each other, and expand that to other deltas, because of this problem which has come up, that those contain a very large number of people, millions of people who are in the front line of sea level rise. So get them to be in solidarity with each other. So if anyone's interested in that idea, I'd be very pleased to hear from you. The Global Delta Solidarity Network, perhaps the model for that is the International Slum and Shack Dwellers Network. Anyway, I'm going to stop now. Nadir, you might want to turn your video off because we can see you talking to someone. I don't know who it is. It's like it's recorded. And we have a couple of questions in the chat box, and we have a few minutes left to invite if there's any others. So, Bashundara,
Terry, we can go on till 9 o'clock.
Oh, okay, that's allowed. Is it? Excellent.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So we can take the questions from the chat and anything else from members of the audience, and then maybe go back to all the panelists at the end. So we have a little time.
Excellent, okay. So there's two questions which are sort of linked from Bashundara that to the Sundarbans research, as you mentioned, migration is coping, but a large population in the Sundarbans practices immobility, both voluntary and involuntary. How do you then see immobility in coping adaptation? And then it goes on, you speak of the lack of identity and rootedness, and people are willing to leave the Sundarbans for work, but then there is more seasonal migration than permanent migration. Does seasonal migration have no connection with identity in your case? So I'd like to ask I hope Sundarbans people had a chance to see those in the chat box to prepare some responses. Has anyone want to respond on that?
I'll say a few words really quickly and then I'll pass it on to Upasona if that's okay.
Thank you, Shababa. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I was reading the question, and even when I was writing this, the presentation slides, I do realize that identity is something that I cannot say as a collective. We spoke to a few people, and those people, like Annu has also reiterated, those who do not have land and who depend on the Sundarbans in extremely dangerous conditions for their livelihood, always want to go somewhere safer, somewhere where there's more security. It doesn't necessarily reflect their love for the place they're born in. It is more to do with the fact that they need to be safe and sheltered. However, I do agree that there is more seasonal migration rather than permanent, but there are more problems or insecurities related to permanent migration. For example, when you migrate to urban cities, there's a lot of unplanned urbanization, especially in the Bangladesh end. You may end up in a poverty trap where you will go to a city and not have jobs. And if you do not have connections and networks, it's also very difficult to migrate permanently. So seasonal migration is more of an option that is taken by people because of that reason as well. But it is true that identity is extremely personal, and I would never be able to comment on it as a collective, how one chooses to define their identity. So that's what I would say, but maybe Upasona can further complement it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shababa. And I think I also have read the questions, and my reflection is quite similar to Shababa. These people are definitely migrating not by choice, by in terms of force. So here we need to identify or give a definition clearly that what is the forced migration or what is the planned migrations. So there are a lot of layers within the migratory population from both the Sundarbans, both India and Bangladesh. So some people, the creamy layer of the educated elite, they are moving as a choice to have a city life, or they don't want to belong any further to this uncertain land. But at the same time, the majority of the
Carry on, yes.
Yeah, so the majority of the populations who are migrating seasonally, they taking it as a alternative to livelihood restorations. So there are complexities, there are layers within this migratory population also, and we cannot say that's it's related to identity. So what we feel we saw in the ground that most of the people, especially who are seasonally migrated, they have a strong kind of feelings that they are from the Sundarbans. And another thing I would like to mention here, because this is something Annu has mentioned as eco-psychiatry's issue. It's like, yeah, I belong to this place, and my resilience towards any adversities is very much evident in terms of my livelihood flexibility or my mobility or in my migratory patterns. So this kind of deep feeling of I am a fighter, or I have my aspirations, even in the woman in the Sundarbans, this is very prominent, and this is I feel that this is very much grounded as a people's perspective in the Sundarbans.
Thank you. I think the next question is from Jayoti, who would be interested in learning how these livelihood traditions linked to or influenced by adjoining national or regional markets, including cross-border trade between India and Bangladesh. What's the role of regional trade and the private sector in these transitions? So I hope you've had a chance to look at that as well. Anyone want to respond to that from either side of the border? It's perhaps difficult because the project hasn't really been looking at cross-border trade.
Terry, can you repeat the questions? I'm unable to find it in the chat box. Yeah.
Okay. So Jyoti would be interested in finding out about the livelihood transitions linked to or influenced by national or regional markets, including cross-border trade, and what's the role of regional trade and the private sector in any of these transitions, if any involvement in these transitions. Jayoti, I don't know if you want to speak your question. It might be that you can make it clearer if you want to speak it.
Hi, Terry. Can I go ahead?
Yep.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. Jyotiraj from India, currently working in Cambodia. As we're talking about adaptation, we do realize that there is a great role for market and market-based instruments. And it's because we're talking about a transboundary landscape and a lot of things happening between India and Bangladesh in terms of regional trade. So I was just wondering how this transitions from agriculture to aquaculture, then to crab, which colleagues were mentioning, how is it sort of linked to some kind of a regional trade, and how does that impact the adaptation or the resilience among communities in the Sundarbans?
Yeah, Terry, shall I go ahead?
Go ahead, Upasona.
Maybe our discussants also can add.
Exactly, that's yeah, I think it's a very relevant point, but as we know, that's the learning, the adaptation related learning is at present is very much lacking in these two regions. So maybe it needs so forget about the cross boundary market analysis or market relation. So that's maybe a very later stage, but that is a very important point that should be there as a part of transboundary initiative. So maybe Annu, Amites, and Nadir could reflect more on these questions because we also wish to learn, wish to hear from you.
Can I add one point here?
Please, Nadir. Yeah.
One of the things is that particularly as we know that the division between this region was on the basis of religion, not on the basis of culture. And that is where after 47, there was a huge cross-boundary movement. So many Hindus from Bangladeshi part, they moved to India, and Muslims from Indian part, they moved to Bangladesh. And that is how, but still there is a huge cross-border relationship and a kinship which exists, and that really entails this cross-border relationship, and that is where that there is a through the river there is a transportation service from Bangladesh by the edge of Sundarbans to Kolkata, and that was one of the connections which established in 1972. And that was been operating until very recently when the Shala River became very shallow. So after that, it stopped for a few years, and then again, it is now sort of up running. So there is a, a continuous relationship. The other thing is that in the southern part of the country, they produce huge amount of coir, the coconut. So the coconut coir, normally, if you would say that global export, India is the lead, and a lot of the Bangladeshi fibers, coconut fibers, they are exported to India, and from India, they have been processed and exported to the southeastern part of northeastern Asia, like Korea and other countries. So there are small level of business relationships that is ongoing, and coir is one of them.
Thank you. Okay, so any other questions or comments from anyone?
Okay, I do have some points. Is it okay?
Thank you, Jagannatha. Yeah.
My points are very simple and straightforward. Thanks. I am of the opinion that we are understanding very little of ecological issues. Ecosystem is one word, a development paradigm most abuses. Look at the migration phenomena. It's already on. Butterflies move from southern part of UK to northern part because of climate change documented decades ago. Now, demography of Europe. You look at America. The Asian technological force is already migrated there. So what I want to infer is this. We are having about 198 kilometers of Odisha coast submerged in Bay of Bengal. Dwarka city of prehistoric days of India below Arabian Sea. You are going to lose the deltas like anything. So forget for a while the nationalistic opinions. I appreciate Nadir because he was very, very sharp in telling how the nationalistic bias is really defeating the historical ecological necessities. So I want to conclude or infer like this. For a while, let us leave the nationalistic thinking as we saw in Paris +5 ambition plan. We should catch the idea that people are losing their habitation. The institutes like UN should step in now so that a new space eco-literacy has to come into picture now, the earthmanship concept. Otherwise,
I'm going to ask you to finish there if you might, because you've made some interesting points. You can follow up in the chat box if you want to.
So I want to just say in another two words, I want to just say, if you have an eco sense built in, we look beyond the artificial barriers and words fail us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions before I hand over to Lyla to finish off our session?
There is a question in the chat box about what I think because Upasona and I couldn't get into this, what kind of initiatives can be considered as transformative in these regions? Maybe I can answer that in a line or two, if that's okay.
Yeah, and there are two others. Please answer the other comments in the chat. And maybe Shibaji and Mahmuda want to come in also quickly. Just look at the chat and respond quickly, all of you. And even if our discussants want to respond to anything, we have a few more minutes.
One of the questions in the chat boxes that inquired about what initiatives could be transformative. In our idea, what we think could be the criteria for transformative is still being understood, and there's no concrete answer for that. However, usually we look at something that's innovative and new to a system that can address the fundamental causes of vulnerability in a system, or that can transform a place or shift location. Some of the initiatives that we are looking at is aqua geoponics, which is soil-less agriculture, because soil salinity is the issue in the region. We're also looking at one of the other projects called Pratik Project, where women are empowered by giving women who are into farming telephone technology, mobile phones, so they can get climate information and data. Using that technology, they can use more innovative farming methods and improve their farms, and also take on other business approaches. So these are some of the innovative initiatives that we think could be transformative, but we're still on the lookout, and this research is far too new and it's still ongoing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Was there another chat box question to respond to? I can't see them actually, so can somebody help?
There is one other question from somebody asking what is the impact on the climate change adaptation interventions that have already been implemented, such as crab rearing, rainwater harvesting, etc. Does the increase in powerful cyclones make these interventions now ineffective? Can they be improved to be more resilient to storm surges? And that question was from James Pender.
Thank you.
Sanjeevda has answered that question in the chat box as well. Maybe he can share his thoughts.
Okay. So I think
maybe I can also add here something regarding this question.
Thanks, Mity. Go ahead.
Yeah, as disaster is very common phenomena in that area, so like they are now becoming more resilient to a storm, like a cyclone or pretty similar sorts of like disaster. So now they are like practicing saline tolerant seeds or like flood tolerant seeds as well. However, after a cyclone, all of their resources, including crops, fisheries, crabs, washes, and they have to start from the beginning. So now they are shifting, or they are thinking about alternative livelihood activities. So like they are raising goats, poultry. Few of them do few of them also work as a day labor. Few are seasonally migrating for earning more.
Okay,
so
great, thank you.
If anyone wants to add, can add here. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so many thanks to Annu, Amites, and Nadir for taking on the comments, and they were not able to see the presentations in advance, so they were having to respond directly during the session, so they did a great job, so many thanks for that. I'd now like to hand over to Lyla to bring the session to an end. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Before me, I think there was, I'd like Sanjeev had raised something. He's our partner also from Caritas. Sanjeev and Shibaji, would you like to have some concluding remarks or raise anything?
As it was what we have got today in presenting, it's very initial inputs, and as was mentioned earlier, it was the Amphan and also the COVID pandemic. We were unable to go to the field, but there are one or two things that we had learned from the community, from the local people with over phone, is throughout this, after the Amphan, the indigenous seed variety that they had done, and for the farmers collectives in the remote or in the periphery, so they actually said that they had fared better in terms of long-term sustainability rather than going from high-yielding variety. So that's one learning. And secondly is they actually wanted a seed bank, a collective of in the locality, rather than being being the market forces driving it, they said that we can have a cooperative, and that's how we can start. So that's what a very interesting insight coming from the local, that we can survive without the outside seeds if we have a seed cooperative. So it's very welcome insight, I would say, towards our tapestry patch research. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sanjeev, you want to say something since you are?
Yes, thank you. I have a comment that the people of the area, it said we have no need any relief, but embankment, sustainable embankment only. Because last year, half dozens of cyclone happened in the area, and when people are adapting in agriculture, slant-tolerant crops or vegetables, then hit another cyclone and damage the embankment. So people are trying to adapt to disaster and climate change issues, but we have some responsibilities who are working in the area, or researchers or government have some responsibilities how to protect their disaster proof environment first in the area, because people's demand is only sustainable environment. So we should rethink this matter, these issues, polder work with sustainable polder system. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjeev.
Can I just, with Terry or Lila's permission, can I just add, just quickly sort of add to what's been going on? Now, I got a comment from James Pender, I think. I thank James for your comment and the question that you raised. Maybe that requires a kind of a session of this kind, perhaps once again, to sort of get back to you. But certainly I'm going to send my email to you, write this down to you. Maybe we could continue chatting, over emails, because certainly this is one of its kind, triggering some of the ways in which we could rethink Sundarbans beyond boundaries. But many more sessions, I'm sure, would address many queries and questions that been constantly, we have as we look at this delta and engage. Thank you very much, Terry and Tapestry, the whole initiative that wanted to think about Sundarban beyond boundaries. I thank you all for this wonderful and warm invite.
Welcome.
Can I just say a few words?
Yeah.
I really thank all of you. And I think, Terry, this idea of Global Delta Solidarity Network is fantastic. As Nadir was saying, yes, the importance of really working together, and Bangladesh has been forward in thinking the Sundarban. The embankments there are so much better, for example, and were made paka, as we say, already in the 60s, whereas in India, a lot of them are still mud embankments. So I think that in a way, Bangladesh has had a lot more concern for the Sundarban, and this is reflected in the kind of policies we see today and the difference between the two countries. So I think, yes, they should be working together a lot more. Thank you so much for enabling this today.
Great. Thank you so much to our discussants, Annu, Amites, and Nadir. And it's really the start of a dialogue. There's so much to talk about in terms of the Delta. There's a lot we've done in Tapestry that we couldn't present. We have looked at things historically also. We've looked at this idea of reclaiming and what that meant and dealing with uncertainty, and also the views of the above of the people and the complexities. And I think, as Annu said, there's so much complexity in terms of culture, the intergenerational stuff we haven't been able to tease out, because clearly there are some who want to go and others will say, this is our home, even though we haven't been here that long. And who defines place, who defines attachment, and how do we deal with these things? And also the role of policymakers, the state. Obviously Bangladesh has managed much better, and there's a lot that India can learn in terms of climate change adaptation. that even in both places, displacement, resettlement, these are huge issues, very political. And I hope we'll be able to carry on. I mean, everybody says this is such a resilient place and people get by, but also there's a whole politics around resilience and who's paying the price and what do we do about that. So I hope we can get together with some of these other people named. So this is just the start of a dialogue. So let's carry on. And thank you very much. Also to Gobeshona, to my Tapestry colleagues who presented, and also Gobeshona for giving us this platform for this first dialogue, and I hope it's one of many.
Thank you so much. And with that, I think you can find all the speakers very easily by searching or on the Tapestry website. And again, love to thank the Gobeshona and ICCCAD staff who have worked so hard, including late nights and weekends, to make this happen. They've been sending emails at all hours, and it is very much appreciated because I think it's made these two sessions go very smoothly. So immensely grateful to you for that. And with that, I think we'll call it an end, and we look forward to emails if you want to get in touch about any more information. So thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.